Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for our office hour webinar today. Like always, find your control panel, open it up by clicking the orange rectangle with the white arrow, and share where you're joining us from today as we wait for some others to join us and to get started. So I'm coming to you from Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, smack dab in the middle of the country today. Looks like we have Michelle from El Paso. Welcome. Good to see you online today. Thanks for joining us. I see a few of our regular attendees in the attendee box, so we're so glad you've chosen to join us again. We love learning with you every couple of weeks on these office hour webinars. Stephanie from Tennessee, welcome. Glad you joined us. Also, thanks for joining us, those who may be on summer break right now. Thanks for taking time to continue learning with us over the summer. Bob from, let's see, Greenville, North Carolina. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you're here. A few more joining us right now. We have about 3 minutes and then we'll get started. So if you're just jumping on, find your control panel. Open up your control panel using that orange box with the white arrow and type in the box where you're joining us from today. It's always fun to see where everyone's coming from. So far, I feel like we have Central and East Coast attendees. I'm curious if anyone from the West Coast is joining us. Phil from Connecticut, welcome. Good to see you again. Laura from Central New York, great to see you. Thanks for being here. We definitely have the center of the country and, East Coast covered. Thanks for jumping on today. We'll get started in about 3 minutes. I will say this in just a moment, but make sure you have something to write with today, even though it is a digital virtual webinar. Make sure you have some writing utensil and then also some type of paper, notepad, sticky note, etc. You will need these items today. So if you're an early bird, go ahead and grab your writing utensil and some type of paper to write on. If you are just jumping in, find that question box. Share with us where you're joining the webinar from today. This is my favorite part. It's always fun to see where people are joining from. Sherry from Mississippi, welcome. Paul's joining us from Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome. Glad y'all are here today. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Like I was saying, this is a virtual webinar, but if you've been here before, they're very highly interactive. Part of today's interactivity, you'll need some type of writing utensil, a pen, pencil, marker, something, and then something to write on, like a notebook, paper, sticky note, something. So if you're an early joiner, feel free to grab those supplies. We'll get started in just about a minute. Michael from Mass, welcome. Thanks for joining us again. It's so exciting to see the ones. I feel like this is like hang out with your friends and learn some more about being an awesome educator time, because we have so many frequent attendees that attend every 2 weeks, and it's great to see y'all on here. We'll get started in about 1 minute. If you're just joining us, jump in that question box, share with us where you're joining from. Like I said earlier, I'm joining today from Oklahoma, where it is sunny. So hope you're having great weather where you're at. Lisa, welcome from Florida. Oh, Savannah from Florida. Eddie's joining us from Indiana. Welcome. Glad you're here. All right, so it is 2 o'clock. Are y'all ready to start? Great. So welcome to 5 formative assessments to increase creativity. Like I always say, if you haven't been here before, these webinars may be unlike any you've attended before. They are highly interactive as we learn with and we learn from each other in these sessions, since they are professional development. You also know, if you've been here, that I like to get started right away. So with that, let's get started. What do you know about formative assessments? Let's start there today. So you're either going to scan the QR code or you can click on the link that was just put in the chat box. And you're going to enter as many responses as you would like about what do you know about formative assessments. Just tell me what you know about formative assessments. If your colleague who teaches or instructs next door to you said, tell me about formative assessments, what would you tell them? So you can scan the QR code with your smartphone using the camera app, or you can click on the link in the chat, which will open a new tab for you. Let's see what some of our possible responses are today. All right. So I'm using the tool Mentimeter. It's one of my favorite tools to use. This is the free version. As always, check with your district, organizational, IT department to make sure you can use it with your students and it's open on your network, etc. So what do we know about formative assessments today? Well, not much actually. Thank you for being honest. Always appreciate the honesty. Ask questions. There's many different ways to assess students. Yep. Formative assessments test understanding, ongoing understanding. They're short, absolutely. I can help you as an instructor get an idea of what students are grasping during learning. Yes, exactly. If someone were to ask me, what's a formative assessment? And I just thought of the first thing that comes to my head, I would think of something like a check for understanding, right? Do my students, are they understanding what we're talking about, especially if you're working from a mastery-based approach? Are they grasping, like what's sticking with my students as we go through this lesson? And then also it provides that feedback to us as instructors of maybe I need to change something, like where can I change my instruction or where can I reteach this in the next lesson, right? So it provides a lot of data for all of us. So this is kind of our collective group definition of what we know about formative assessments. Let's keep going. So today we're going to explore 5 possible formative assessments that really think about increasing creativity with our students. We're also going to look at the relationship between creativity and recall of information. So we want students to really put that new content, new knowledge into that long-term memory. So we're going to look at some ways that we can talk about recall as well. Also, this webinar is being recorded. So in 24 hours, you will receive an email, whichever email you use to register for this webinar, a link to the recording, as well as a certificate of attendance. That certificate of attendance is also attached in the handouts tab of your control panel if you would like to go ahead and download that during the webinar before we leave. Also, like I said, before you dive in, you're going to need something to write with, like a pen, marker, pencil, and you're going to need something to write on today, like a notepad, a sticky note, a piece of paper, something. But don't worry, you're not going to have to turn it in. You'll just need those supplies as we get going. All right, so what did we just do? When I asked you, what do you know about formative assessments? That's kind of like a brain dump, or we could call it even like a one-pager, where I'm asking you to write down everything you know. You can use this at the end of a lesson as a formative assessment to really check for understanding. You can look for gaps in knowledge. And like someone said earlier, you can see what really stuck with your participants. Now, while these one-pagers really don't have any type of criteria, I mean, they do have criteria, but not really rules. The point of the criteria that you would give is to give students that freedom to really just lay out their thoughts about what's stuck. So ideally, you would have your nice lesson, and then as your formative assessment towards the end, you would say, let's complete a one-pager. Write down everything you know about the topic we just discussed. Kind of like I asked you, what do you know about formative assessments? Just list what you know about formative assessments. This can also be a combination of words and images. If you would like, you can set the criteria as an instructor. But the crucial element is that students have the freedom to select kind of how they answer and what elements they might place on the page. But why are these one-pagers helpful as a formative assessment? Well, they can activate that prior knowledge, help them make those connections with their new knowledge. They have the ability to answer your prompt in their own way. It can be digital. So a digital response could have words, images, even video, or you could have an analog one-pager, that's maybe words, drawings, figures, etc. So with that, grab your writing utensil and what you're going to write on. I'm going to give you 45 seconds and we are going to clock it because you know I like to stay on time. On your paper, make a few notes about one-pagers. Think about your responses to those prompts, as well as what we just discussed. 45 seconds to write down your thoughts about a one-pager. Go. Okay, did you get something down about one-pagers? Okay, awesome. Now, you know I would love to dive much deeper into these, and we'll keep kind of spiraling back to them as we go throughout. But I am going to put some links in the chat as we go throughout, so you'll have some resources that you can take home, because we heard from you in the last couple of webinars that you want more links in the chat and not so many QR codes, and that's what we're working on. So let's keep moving on to the next one. So we just did one-pagers. One way that you can increase creativity in your classroom and formative assessments, one-pagers. Let's go to the next one. Sketchnoting. Have you heard of sketchnoting? What is this? So it's simple, kind of hand-drawn renderings of things like facts. It could be dates, concepts. It's like an alternative way to take notes during a lecture. It could be a way that you visually represent vocabulary terms, and it could even be an exit ticket to see what's stuck with our learners. You know, so why would we use something like sketchnoting as a formative assessment? Because we're promoting that creative thinking that you can see on the screen. We're looking at retaining information. It's multisensory, and we're looking at making those connections with learning, right? So there's several reasons we would use that. What else does sketchnote look like? So here's another example of sketchnoting and kind of how you might use it in the classroom. There's many ways to use it in traditional classrooms, as well as career and technical education classrooms, health classrooms, etc. Let's see what else we can learn about sketchnoting. Now with sketchnoting, because you're making a visual representation of kind of taking notes, you might have some elements of sketchnoting, right? So you can change your lettering, how you write, your font. Your bullet notes might be creative. You might have frames for titles or topics or sections you want to remember. You might have different elements for connectors. So you're connecting prior knowledge to new knowledge, or connecting ideas on your page, maybe like a mind map or a concept map. Maybe you're also having people. So there's different ways to show one person, a group of people, a thinking person. These are all elements that can be part of your sketch note as you're taking notes during a lecture, a podcast, a video, etc. So here are some more examples of a sketch note. What's great about this is that it could be a formative assessment. So the one on the right, the Magnificent 7 Ingredients, is this one from Culinary Arts. That could be your formative assessment. If your learning objective was something like explore the Magnificent 7 Ingredients, then this would be a great case for a formative assessment with a sketch note. So students could then show you what they know in a visually appealing manner. So hopefully you're grasping just a little bit of sketch notes. Why sketch note, right? It brings those writing and drawing skills together, that multisensory. It also helps us organize, retain ideas and concepts, right? So not only are we trying to check for understanding, see what's stuck with our learners, look for gaps in understanding and knowledge, but we also want students to be able to retain that information and recall it. All right, so once again, grab your handy dandy paper and your writing utensil, 45 seconds. Write down a few notes about what you remember about sketchnoting. You ready? Go. Okay, did you get a couple things written down about sketchnoting? And you're probably thinking, Mandy, this is so unlike most of your webinars. They're mostly digital, they're super fast paced, there's not a lot of time to reflect during the actual webinar, right? But as always, there's a method to my madness and we'll get there, I promise. All right, so this was everything about sketchnoting. Let's go to the next one. Now this is one of my favorite ones. It's called cognitive comic. So basically, it's a strategy. I'm having trouble talking today. It's a strategy where students can create short comics to artistically express an understanding of a concept or show you what they learned during that lesson. So you could provide a prompt to students. Then you could provide a blank comic book template or comic strip template on paper that you can find a million of those just by Googling them. Teachers Pay Teachers, all those kind of pages have a lot of the templates already for you. Or you could do a digital one like I'm showing here on the screen that I use the website Storyboard That. I use the free version to create some type of comic. You can also use things like Canva and Adobe have comic strip templates already built in their programs that you could use with your students as well. I did link Storyboard That in the chat just so you'll have an additional resource. So what you'll do, provide a prompt. Students will then artistically represent their response to the prompt or everything they learned about formative assessments today, maybe like you see on screen, like they went to school, they listened to some type of webinar, and now they're in their room thinking about like, how can I create this comic strip? So this one is a very simple, but very artistically based one. So once again, you're bringing those writing and drawing elements together. This is really great too if you're doing a formative assessment and maybe a lesson or activity that's really heavy with vocabulary, because our learners, students can show that connection between words and images. This one also has a lot of student voice and student choice. So they're having lots of options and decisions that they're making about how they want to represent the topic, what they want to represent, what voice they want to come across. So this cognitive comic strategy for a formative assessment that can increase creativity is really focused on student voice and choice. All right, once again, grab that pen and paper, 45 seconds. Make yourself a few notes about cognitive comic. You can write down what you're learning. You can write down how you want to use it in your classroom next year or this summer. Go. Okay, did you make a note? You get a couple notes down about cognitive comics or comic strips? Perfect. Let's keep going. So next on our list, so we've covered 3 possible formative assessments that can increase creativity. We're now going to go to the 4th one. So this is called student produced quizzes. So you're going to scan the QR code. It'll take you to Socrative. I'm hoping that this is still logged in on my side. The link is also in the chat that will take you to our room. So we're going to pretend that we had this great lesson today on formative assessments, and I asked each of you to create one question to add to a quiz about today's webinar. So if we were going to create a formative assessment at the end of this, I would want one question from every student. Let's see what you created. I kind of already took the liberty of creating the quiz, but let's just pretend y'all created these questions today. And then I put it in Socrative, and now we're going to take this quiz to see what's going on. All right. So hopefully you're seeing the formative assessment questions pop up. And what you're going to do is respond to what is a formative assessment. Now it's going to ask you to enter your name. You can put your real name, you can put your initials, whatever you want. That works for me. What's cool about this is you created this question and these possible answer choices. I can then show the results. Excellent. We can move on to question 2. This is an example of a sketch note, true or false. You can all submit your answer, and then we'll look at it. Aren't you so pleasantly surprised with your great formative assessment quiz questions that you created? Once again, we can show the results, move on to the next one. This is a picture of what type of formative assessment that we just discussed. You can type in your response in the box and then hit submit. And as you can see, there are responses coming in. I have names hidden. That's the cool feature about Socrative. I can show names or hide names. I can also show answers or hide answers. We'll show the answers. So we got comic, cognitive, comic, great. And you can see the answers are coming in. So this could be an example of how your students could create a formative assessment or a quiz themselves. Now, why might we want them to do that? You know, studies have revealed that learning strategies require additional cognitive effort as like retrieval practice, elaboration, concept mapping or drawing. They also really encourage our students and learners to produce material that's deeper and maybe consider it from a different context. You know, this generates more of that memory traces that aid in retention of information. I mean, why not have students create their own quizzes and study guides? There actually was a study done in 2014, because you all know I like research studies for education, and they found a 10 percentage point increase in the final grades of students who created the learning materials and wrote part of their own exam. So there is a quite student achievement factor associated with student-produced quizzes, besides just being a way for students to increase creativity while looking at formative assessments. So student-produced quizzes, we know that they can help boost student engagement because they're part of that process. They're owning the learning. It can also help us as instructors find misconceptions or gaps in knowledge based on the questions that our students are creating and submitting to us for the formative assessment. It also takes that higher order thinking, some critical thinking skills, because they're looking at the material from a different perspective than just learning to take it in. They're then having to internalize it and ask questions from a different perspective to create those formative assessment quizzes. So number 4, for our formative assessments that increase creativity, that allow students to be creative, have voice and choice, is our student-produced quizzes. So for the last time, whoops, I don't know what happened there. Grab your pen, grab your paper, 45 seconds to make some notes about student-produced quizzes and how they might work for you. Go. All right, did you make a few notes about student-produced quizzes and how you might use them? Awesome. Let's go to our last one. So think about note-taking, but think about it in perspective of retrieve-taking. So in the chat box today, type out a few things that you have learned about creative formative assessments. You can use the notes that you've been taking on each type of assessment throughout this webinar. I told you there's a little method to my madness. So now, type a few sentences, a few comments, a few phrases in that question box to share with us what you've learned so far today. So there's some coming in. They have learned about that they can be multisensory, right? So a lot of our assessments can think about like words, drawing. You can add sound with video. That formative assessments can be periodic during the instruction. Learned about cognitive comics, that these assessments can be quick and easy. We learned that one-pagers, they can submit analog or digital, right? So there's ways for both of us to learn in both of those worlds today. That these assessments are interactive, They involve students. Most utilize visual, right? Students are more likely to succeed after making their own materials. Yes, I love that study, even though it's from 2014. I thought that was a very great one. And then our formative assessments can be quick today. Yeah, very quick formative assessments. We also learned today that there's a lot more than I previously realized, as well as some pre-formatted ones. Absolutely. Anything I can have that's pre-formatted or a template, I'm all about working smarter. We have a lot on our plates as educators and instructors. So sometimes we just need some activities that can reduce that cognitive load for us so that we can be our best instructor. We learned about sketchnoting, absolutely. They like the fact that student-created quizzes can raise performance by 10%. Me too. Anything backed by research, especially peer-reviewed research, I'm all about. That's in the best interest of the student, of course. We learned about the cognitive comics and student choice. We looked about ways that we can find misconceptions and gaps in students' knowledge. So we've learned a lot about formative assessments and kind of how they can set our students up for success, how they can be more visually appealing, etc. So this last one, this is number 5, and we're going to call it retrieve taking. So instead of note taking, retrieve taking. So like I said a while ago, did you know you've been preparing for this formative assessment this whole webinar? So adding an opportunity for creativity into your formative assessment can really help students recall information. And this retrieve taking idea does just that. You know, we all know as educators, research has long stated that note-taking is not a very effective strategy for learning. So how do we switch to retrieve taking? So ideally, you can have students or learners read a book, attend a lecture, watch a YouTube video without taking notes. Then have them close the book, end the video, pause the podcast, whatever we're doing, pause the lecture, and have them write down everything that they remember. Kind of like I had you do at the end of every one of the first 4 formative assessments. Now, the important part would be really then to go back and reread, rewatch, re-listen with some feedback. But the information that's been written down during the pause becomes your notes. So you're no longer taking notes during a lecture, you're taking a pause, writing down what you remember, and then that becomes your notes to study. So just like this, I allowed you to have 45 seconds at the end of each of those formative assessments to write down what you remembered. If you're looking for maybe a more structured way to use this in your classroom, you could think about using the Cornell notes. That graphic organizer has a summary section at the bottom. So they have their 2 columns to take notes in, and the bottom is a summary section. That summary section does just that. It allows for recall and retrieval of information from the notes that they've already taken. So we know that students can be creative, they create things that are visually appealing, they can make their thinking visible to us as instructors, and they can write down, draw, sketch, create questions to create these formative assessments, because we're wanting them to recall and retrieve information in those formative assessments, right? And that's how we can gauge learning, we can help provide feedback, and ultimately we can have our students who are engaged in the process of learning. So let's start to wrap up. So here's what we did today. We did the one-pagers, we did the sketch noting, we did the cognitive comics, we did the student-produced quizzes, and then we did the retrieve taking, which you didn't even know you were doing until the very end. And then we used Mentimeter, and then we also used the tool Socrative for our student-produced quizzes. Once again, all free ed tech tools, those last 2. Check with your IT department, make sure you can use them with students on your network, etc., before you use them. And if you ever have questions, you can always feel free to contact me. I'm about to put my contact information up. I'm happy to help you get those going in your classroom. So today, our formative assessment for this session is going to be very simple, very quick, not as creative as the 5 that we've talked about. But in the question box, just type one thing that you learned today in the webinar, just one thing. Maybe it's one thing that you want to go back and tell a coworker. Maybe it's one thing that you want to try next semester, any of that. Leave us one comment in the question box, and then we'll go through our ending slides and we'll take questions, and then that will be our 30 minutes. It's so fast and furious. June shared that last method we talked about was very similar to what They teach us active reading in elementary school. Absolutely. Yep. So here's what we learned today, y'all, as a group. We learned about retrieve taking, emphasized more visual, not just written notes, giving students more options for taking notes, student-produced quizzes or tests. We learned about all the 5 strategies. I'm going to share them with their colleagues, put them into practice. Want to try retrieve taking with nursing students? That sounds like a great idea, great plan. Had never heard of cognitive comics. Well, great, now you have. Sketchnoting seems like a valuable method to note-taking. Absolutely. So it seems like we're all leaving with something. So hopefully today you learned at least one thing that you just shared, and maybe we learned with and from each other today as part of our professional development. We have 3 minutes. I'm gonna get us wrapped up and out of here in 3 minutes, I promise. So in the chat box, I put 2 links as well. One is to our main GW page and one is to our professional development page. This is our GW page. If you use our resources, this is where you'll go to find everything. There's also a QR code if you want to scan. It'll take you if you want a preview of a textbook. That's always available here. It's also available on the website. Also, these are super fast and furious 30 minutes just to introduce ideas, give you some quick resources that you could use in the classroom tomorrow, help expand your thinking maybe about other resources and strategies to help engage students, increase student achievement, all those things we all strive to do as educators. But if you want something more in depth and a little slower pace, check out our PD page. We have different offerings that we provide. We do in-person, we do virtual. Also, don't forget we have an on-demand learning library and we have instructional strategy videos and instructional strategy activities to go. Check out those free resources for you. And with that, if you have questions, please type them in the question box. I am going to spend a couple of minutes answering those questions on anything we talked about today. If you have a question or you want to go deeper into some topic and need a little bit more explanation or you need some additional links to resources, feel free to email me. My email address is on the screen. Feel free to take a screenshot of that with your phone. You can reach out anytime. We are always here to make sure that we can provide resources and support to you, not just with textbooks, but with instructional practices. And with that, there is an evaluation at the very end that we would love for you to take as soon as we close this webinar. You'll also be receiving that recording in 24 hours along with your certificate of attendance. So be looking for that in your email inbox. Sometimes it goes to spam. And also, if you want that certificate of attendance today, you can download it from the handouts section in the control panel. So I'm gonna take a second just to answer a couple of questions. And then thank you so much for spending this June day with us. We hope you have a great summer semester, summer break, whatever your summer looks like. And then we'll see you for the next one. We had some questions for cognitive comics. You mentioned Canva and other site. The other site was Adobe. They have some resources and templates already set up as well that you can use. And I think that's all the questions I see coming in. So it's 2:30. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you'll have a super afternoon.